All right, so you're welcome. I can see a lot of familiar faces here. Welcome, everybody. And I think we can get right into it. I can see my guest is already here. Last time we had challenges with my guest. I also had challenges with my own Twitter account. But my able co-host, stepped in for me, and we managed to pull it off. Today, it looks like the technology is in our favor, and we'll be able to proceed with the space without any hindrances. All right. Today on the space, we're going to be sharing experiences of advocating against unsafe abortion. And we'll be sharing, of course. Remember, this is an open space, so we try to make it as open as possible. Everybody has an opportunity to speak or to get heard, but we also hear from people who have walked this journey, people who have done this for a long time. And one of those is Rose Wachikona, who is a senior attorney, Women Link Worldwide. Rose, just unmute and say hello to our listeners, and also maybe tell them something about yourself that I have not told them already.
Thank you, Daniel. I don't know. I have very many things that I can say. Some may be scandalous, others may not be. But my name is Rose Wachikona. I work with Women's Link Worldwide. I'm a practicing lawyer uh, in Uganda, and I do largely public interest litigation with a bias towards women's rights, specifically around sexual reproductive health and rights. And access to safe abortion is one of the areas that I pay particular attention to because it's an area that affects women predominantly. So I'm happy to be here and share some of my experiences. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Rose. I think everybody now has caught up and really understands the guests that we have today. And for the next 1 hour, we'll be talking to Rose and to the public about these issues of advocating against unsafe abortions. Rose, your first question is going to really be about what experiences you have. When you saw the topic that we sent you, what was the first thing that came into mind? Maybe we can start with what is the best experience that you've had advocating against unsafe abortions, and the worst experience that you've had.
Yeah, the experiences have been vast and over a long spectrum, but I think the biggest challenge that we have had is the misconceptions that surround access to safe abortion and the way abortion is perceived within our communities. So I'll give an example of one of the perceptions that it's only young girls who have abortions. And you're telling people, no, even married women, older women who are in their 50s, like women of reproductive age, right from the age of 15 upwards, will have abortions. So it's not really a problem that is only particular to young girls. So you'll find that it is often conflated with young girls who are promiscuous, which is another myth that you try to backtrack and tell people that no, usually an abortion will be as a result of an unintended pregnancy or a pregnancy that is not viable, that happens spontaneously or that is induced. And it, it, it doesn't always arise out of promiscuity. Sometimes it arises out of necessity. And so there are so many misconceptions that people have about access to safe abortion, and they have branded the people who have abortions and put them in a particular category as these young, promiscuous people who just want to kill babies all the time. And then they forget to situate people who have abortions all over the place because they can be in different categories with different circumstances, and there could be different reasons why people choose to have access to an abortion at any one time. And we find that most of these perceptions then go ahead to drive policy, and they go ahead to drive laws, which means that abortion is then restricted based on the biases that people have based on their perceptions. The other perception that we try to backtrack, which is inherently within itself is wrong, is that an abortion is inherently unsafe, unsafe for the woman. But that's because historically there have not been good methods of having abortion. So many women would die. People have very bad and gory stories where women have bled to death. Their insides and uteruses and reproductive organs have been damaged severely. But this is because the law had blocked out the healthcare system. So people couldn't access an abortion within a health facility with a trained healthcare professional. So again, trying to backtrack it that abortion done well with a trained health worker in a facility is actually quite very safe. So for me, I think my biggest challenge has been around the misconceptions that people have and the translation of these biases towards the laws and policies that govern access to safe abortion.
We've spoken extensively during the series of these spaces about the perception of the society, the community. As an advocate for safe abortions, how does society perceive abortion? Uh, don't you get some challenges there? Because from the doctors that we spoke to, the journalists, it looks like society's perception has effect on how they take the messages that you put out there. How has society
Mm.
perceived you as Rose Wachikona?
Okay. Of course, I've had challenges on my own, both individually at home, but also broadly within the society that I align myself to, which is the Uganda Law Society, because of the politics and the values that you hold. But it's because people don't understand access to safe abortion as inherently a public health issue. They just assume that if it is criminalized, then it will stop, and that in itself just drives it underground, and people then will just end up having unsafe abortions, if anything at all. So again, critically looking at it and trying to map it out from that regard, definitely when you now go to church, everyone looks at you weirdly and they are thinking, are you still a Christian? Like, yes, but I'm a Christian who actually deals with the realities of people's lives. I don't deal with the hard line of how people are supposed to live their lives. It is for the priest to prescribe how people are supposed to live their lives, but it is for the people to actually implement how they live their lives. And people's lives are not going to be led in a straight line. Otherwise, we wouldn't have challenges in this world if we all followed the rules that are placed before us. So again, trying to follow up on people who fall through the cracks and try to make sure that even while dealing with them, we do it in a manner that is dignified and in a manner that is humane and which will allow them to continue with their lives without a lot of backlash. It's just like how you talk about rehabilitation, even for people who are prisoners. It's not that, okay, I committed a crime, I should be taken away from society, let's lock them up and throw away the key. But then how do we go ahead to rehabilitate people and bring them back and integrate them into society? And if someone doesn't want to do that work, then who will? So those are some of the issues that come up in terms of some of the perceptions that people conflate, and they conflate it and confuse it with an issue that, okay, this is what they have prescribed for us in church, therefore everyone is going to do that. No, that's not it. People are going to have sex outside marriage. People are going to have sex without protection. People are going to commit adultery. That's just human nature, that we are prone to sin. Even priests say that. So for me, that is my take on it, even in terms of the perceptions that people have about access to safe abortion and it being a sin. That would be it in terms of how many times have they told you that this is a sin and you don't commit it. They will tell you don't lie, but you lie every single day. So just taking it into context and know that human beings are not perfect and they'll not always do as they are told.
In all the time that you've done advocacy, has it worked? Has Do you see some light at the end of the tunnel? Have you had some changes in minds? Have you managed to change some minds in your work? And if so, if you could share, what things do people agree about, and what are the contentious issues? Because I know normally whenever there are contentious matters, there is always points of agreement where everybody says, okay, this is the baseline, and then after that there are issues that are contentious. So in this entire advocacy around unsafe abortions, what are the things that at least fund wide everybody agrees with, and what are those things that are contentious?
I think we've had some wins. Some of the wins I can talk about include the inclusion of post-abortion care and mandating it in public health facilities. Before that, people would say that you can't provide post-abortion care, and actually we had some even religious hospitals and health facilities that were not providing post-abortion care, or if they were providing it, they were delaying and stigmatizing the women who go before them. But then the Ministry of Health released the 2006 guidelines, updated them in 2012, where they are demanding that all public health facilities provide post abortion care. So, on our part, that becomes a win where we are saying, okay, whereas the abortion itself, you don't have to have it in a health facility. At least a woman doesn't have to die where she experiences complications, but she can go to a health facility and be able to get the much needed care that she needs and further counseling to help her along the line. So for me, I think that is a win in terms of recognizing that women don't even have to be penalized at that. But then we also see that that now extends to even health workers who provide post abortion care. It means they cannot be criminalized under the law. So if you intervene at that point and say, no, I didn't induce it, it happened on its own, and I'm just providing life saving care to this woman, then that means you cannot be criminalized within our court system. Again, that becomes a win because it enables health workers to intervene and support women to continue living and to continue being productive in society. Some of the other wins that we have had are in terms of the including of health workers. Now we see them even increasingly coming out and demanding and advocating for the government to actually decriminalize. At first, it used to be hush hush, they didn't know how to intervene, but now they are using their positioning in society, their clout in society to just demand that there be decriminalization. And one of the points that I think we agree on coherently is that women shouldn't die because they've had an abortion. I think that is something that everyone agrees on. People may believe that they need to be punished or something like that, but everyone agrees that women should not die. And you know, that is the biggest issue that we are facing right now is that because of unsafe abortions, many women are dying. They are dying, they are suffering morbidities, and everyone in society agrees that no, they shouldn't be dying. And if we are saying they shouldn't be dying, then that means there has to be access to the necessary health care so that they do not die.
All right. The best line is life, and that's very very encouraging for me to hear, because if at least everybody agrees that life should be preserved, that the life of these women should not go just because they might have done undergone an unsafe abortion. Now, what is the experience that you face when you talk to the women themselves? Because at one point, I had voices that were saying, unsafe abortions are a gender-based violence issue. The gender-based violence matter during the 16 days of activism against GBV last year. So I just want to ask, what is the perception between women and men? Because internationally, I know that this debate has taken on it has gone to that level where women are saying it's our bodies, and therefore we need to be at the table where we are deciding what happens to our bodies. And then there is the men on the other side. How has the community taken your advocacy on both sides, the men versus the women?
I think we have to contextualize in terms of Uganda and recognize the fact that we live in a highly patriarchal society. And even in some of these relationships, you have to know where does the money lie. And it's not always my body, my choice. Sometimes the choice to have the abortion is not on the woman. Many times you'll find it is the man who is demanding for it because he has the financial muscle. And of course, you know how children are perceived in our society, that they belong to the man. So again, he becomes the decision maker within that particular relationship. So I think I want us to contextualize it very much to Uganda as we see it right now. Another thing I want to dispel is that not every woman who has an abortion is pro abortion. Abortion and having an abortion is very situational. It is extremely situational. So you have to situate a woman who wants an abortion at a particular time, because this is not a decision that she may make 6 months later or next year or the other year or the other year. Most women who are heavily anti abortion are women who have had abortions, but it's because at that time in their lives, it was probably what they felt was the best decision or the only decision. Most of them actually won't call it the best, they'll call it the only decision they felt they could make at that particular time, because the circumstances of life will push you into a corner in that you feel this is the only thing that you can do in order for you to survive. So again, it becomes an element of survival. So when you come in terms of situating it in Uganda, there are two faces to the abortion discourse. The first discourse is, I get pregnant, I go to my boyfriend and tell him I'm pregnant. He's like, I'm not ready to have kids. Let's go to the hospital, or let's go, I know someone to take care of it. The woman doesn't want, but the man wants her to have the abortion. How do you harmonize that conversation? How do you harmonize that couple? The other one is where the woman herself doesn't want the abortion, but the man does. Maybe the woman herself wants the abortion, but the man doesn't want her to have it. How do you harmonize that particular position? For me, my take on the whole conversation is, who is most affected, whose body is going to suffer the most intrusion, who is going to suffer the worst brunt of the procedure that is going to happen. And that is the person who has to take priority in terms of deciding. And for me, that would be a woman. I don't know if it is the feminist in me who decides that way, but again, looking at it from that way. But when you come to Uganda and you contextualize it, you will find that many times it will be the man who is demanding for the woman to have the abortion because he has the financial power. But then at the same time, many women don't want to have kids. Abatalina chika, that's what they call it. It's like, and now if I give birth to this child and they are disowned, the man doesn't want the pregnancy, he's not recognizing it, then they are forced into a decision that otherwise they wouldn't make.
All right, now I just want to let the public know that you can weigh in on this conversation. You can write in the comment section, which is at the bottom right corner of your screen. You can tap the button there, go to the comment section and write. There are people that were complaining that they were not hearing. I do not know if you can hear now. Please go to that comment section and reply to your own tweets and let us know. Muzukuru wa Mulondo said he could not hear, and City Hasi, please go in and reply to your tweets and tell us if you can hear us now. I, for one, on one side, I'm not getting any connection problems, and I can hear Rose perfectly. If everybody on the space can hear me, please just give me a thumbs up or a heart emoji. Just give any emoji if you can hear us correctly. If I don't see any emojis, then I'll assume that all of you guys cannot hear us. If you can hear us, give us. I can see a thumbs up from Dr. Henry. Chirabo is also hearing correctly. Double heart emojis from Chirabo. Thank you very much. Triple Chirabo. That's enough. You have a heart emoji on your Twitter name, so that's as many heart emojis as we can have. But thank you so much, Chirabo, for being on the space with us. Thanks a lot. Now, you remember you can go to the comment section and give us a comment or a question, but also the floor will be opened in 4 minutes. You'll be able to, and I think you can just request for the microphone even now as I continue asking Rose a few more questions, and you will also have an opportunity to speak and be heard. Remember, this is an open space, it's a safe space, and everybody is welcome to have their views. Whether you agree or disagree with my guest, it doesn't matter. You have an opportunity to speak. Everybody will get an opportunity to speak. So let's continue with Rose. Um, it's as you said, it's an issue of where the money lies, where the power lies, and we do not live in a vacuum. I remember when I was interviewing Raymond Mujuni, he told on these very spaces about unsafe abortions, he told me that journalism in Uganda is not being done away from Uganda. We are in the same context of Uganda, and therefore we are bound by the same, society's biases, the laws, and all that sort of thing. So, Rose, in your opinion, who are most at risk of unsafe abortions? What is the most at risk group, and what have you done to ensure that your advocacy targets them and that you save this most at risk group from unsafe abortions?
So, in terms of some of the analysis that we have done around access to safe abortion, we have to realize that it's not just a gendered issue, but it's also a class issue. So you will find that people who have money are not affected by these conversations because they have the money to be able to pay a doctor and get their services. Others even have the money to just fly over to South Africa where abortion is legal. They'll have their procedure, come back into the country and continue with their lives. So again, abortion becomes a class issue. It becomes an issue of economics. Who has money? Who doesn't have money? If you have money in our society, you can access a safe abortion. But if you do not have money in our society, believe you me, whatever you do, you will not be able to do that. And so you find the most vulnerable people are young girls. And that is how they have ended up at the crux of the conversation. First of all, because most of them are economically dependent on their parents. The second bit is their decision-making powers are very limited. First of all, because most of the time they are children and they need a guardian to decide for them on most of the things, but also they haven't yet grown into themselves to exercise their autonomy as probably they should. So when you go down and trace some of the cases where people have actually been arrested for having abortions, you rarely find an older woman who has a job like me and can take care of herself. You'll find these young girls who are probably in S4, S3, S2, and the circumstances are just so deviant, but they just look at the vulnerabilities that she finds herself in. And so for me, I think the most vulnerable people are young girls who don't have money and who are economically dependent on their parents and probably have a neglectful partner who has somehow run away from the entire responsibility. Some may or may not be escorted by their female relatives to the to the facilities where they ended up in these problems. And so sometimes even the parents will end up getting arrested because of that. But most of the people who are arrested then become either health workers or these girls. So the other vulnerable group then becomes the health workers. Because now when they arrest these young girls and they come before the police, as a give and take or a negotiation, they'll usually hand over the health worker who helped them to have this abortion. So then the health workers then become vulnerable because then the police, knowing that this health worker probably has a bit of money, will use it to blackmail them and extort money out of them. So those are the two most vulnerable groups in this entire conversation. The health workers who are trying to help and the young girls because of the disempowerment and the vulnerabilities that they face and they get affected by it. What we are trying to do, of course, is to arm the health workers to educate them on how they can better protect themselves and work within the law, so that they know that beyond this point, perhaps I shouldn't go, and use some particular models that are aimed at reducing the risk of the young girls. Again, it is to empower them to protect themselves and take charge of your reproductive health. Your reproductive health is not dependent on a man. It's not dependent on your boyfriend. If you're going to have sex with someone and he's telling you, I don't want to use a condom, who's going to suffer the consequences? Again, arming them with that power to say, no, I will not have sex with you except if it's with a condom. Arming them with the ability to access contraceptives as and when they need them, because some find themselves in long-term sexual relationships, so that young girls can be able to know that if I do this, I will prevent a pregnancy. If I do this, I'll prevent an STD. That's when sexuality education becomes extremely key and very important for young people. But then again, as a society, we haven't even embraced things as simple as sexuality education. We want to push it out of our systems. But how are young girls going to protect themselves from pregnancy and from STDs if we are not arming them with the information to be able to do so, or if we are not empowering health workers to be able to even provide contraceptives to young girls, even without parental consent, because that becomes extremely important and extremely urgent. That if I am a girl and I'm having sex regularly, then I should be allowed to access a contraception, whether or not you agree with that position in my life.
Well, do you think, Rose, that that the law is empowering or disempowering your advocacy? Because you're talking about issues like sexuality education, and I've done numerous news stories. I've actually done investigations about the impact of the lack of the sexuality education in schools, and it's terrible how girls are getting pregnant during their first encounter with sex. They don't even know it's that bad. They don't even know that there is, you can get pregnant from sex. Some of them are just trying out for the first time and they get pregnant. And access to contraceptives is very difficult for these young girls, especially in the rural community. So do you think that the policies and the laws of Uganda are empowering or disempowering this very most at risk group of Ugandans?
I think they are very disempowering because they treat abortion as an isolated incident. But as we've discussed, Daniel, it's not. It arises from a breadth of issues. It arises from gendered issues. It arises from issues to do with sexuality education. It arises from issues to do with access to services. And all of these must work together to ensure that a young girl doesn't get pregnant. But if you have taken away sexuality education, you have taken away, even if I've gotten the education, but I cannot go to a health facility and get a condom, I can't go there and get a contraceptive, you have taken away that ability, but then you have not taken away my ability to have sex. I will still go ahead and have the sex, and I'll end up back to default settings. So our laws are unfortunate in that they treat access to safe abortion as an isolated incident. They treat it as an event. They treat it almost like when you're considering maybe a marriage ceremony, they'll treat it like a wedding. And yet, there is an entire marriage that goes around a wedding. There is the dating phase, there is the phase when you're now fiancés, then there is a phase when you get married, and then you live out your marriage and possibly even the divorce phase if it ends up in that direction. So we should stop treating sexuality and take apart instances of it, but treat it as something that interconnects to each other. When I'm discussing sexuality education, I'm discussing abortion. When I'm discussing access to contraceptives, I'm discussing abortion. When I'm discussing issues to do with gender, I'm discussing abortion. So it's because everything is terribly interconnected, but our laws treat it as if it is a one-time event, that for this one day you have been a sinner, and then they neglect all the other things that were not put into making sure that this girl doesn't get pregnant. But even after punishing her, usually they will not go ahead to rehabilitate and teach her again, how not to get pregnant again. So you'll find someone will have an abortion today, 1 month later they are pregnant again because they haven't gotten the right counseling, they haven't gotten the right information, they haven't gotten the right services. That's why, again, we demand that when you put in place these restrictive laws, it prevents people from going to hospitals or health facilities where they would get holistic care, which includes counseling post the abortion, before the abortion, and even during the abortion. So it's a whole range of issues, but then at the same time, they go hand in hand with other policies that the National Sexuality Education Framework, which up to now they still haven't rolled out as a country. But even when you read it in its entirety, it doesn't talk about contraceptives for young girls. It just talks about condom use. And it's talked about in the peripheries. Contraceptives are only talked about with young girls who are already married. But how do I end up married when sex has not played a role somewhere along the way? So I think we need to put more thought into some of our policies and some of our laws, because sometimes we just treat them as isolated incidences instead of one thing leading to another.
All right, thank you very much, Rose. The floor is open, ladies and gentlemen. You can request for the microphone and get an opportunity to speak, but also you can write in the comment sections, bottom left of your screen. Write in the comment section your view or comment. You could not, there are many, there could be many requests, and you may not get an opportunity to speak in audio, but you can have your say on this in the comment section, which is at the bottom right of your screen. So just click on that button and comment, but also request for the microphone. It's a first come, first served basis. So those who request first will certainly get the microphone first from me. All right. What can we do, Rose? What can be done under the current? Because there are answers that there are answers to this question, like changing our law, and that's a long term issue. And yet, unsafe abortions are happening as we speak right now. There are a number of unsafe abortions currently being happening right now as we speak in Uganda. So how do we stop it, at least in the short run, and also what can be done in the long run?
I think some of the archaic laws that I don't even want to call them archaic because some are quite recent. For example, the recent what do they call them? The recent guidelines on management of pregnant girls in school, which force girls to choose between going to school and being pregnant. These are some of the things that our policymakers need to realize may drive someone to say, no, my education is more important than carrying this pregnancy. Because as soon as those guidelines were published and they were enforced, there was a spike in abortions all over for young girls because they wanted to go back to school and they didn't want to be found pregnant and therefore expelled for that 1 year. We need to relook and critically consider some of these policies and reevaluate. But then another thing that we need to do is, as a country, I think we need to just be realistic. Sometimes we live in an idealistic world where we think everyone reads the Bible every day and follows it to the T, or the Quran every day and follows it to the T, which is not true. People are having sex. When you look at some of our statistics, 22% of girls will tell you they started their, rather, teenagers will tell you that they started having sex at the age of what, 15? 25% of girls are pregnant by the time they reach 19 years of age. So we need to be a little bit more broad in the way that we address some of these issues, especially around teenage pregnancies. But then at the same time, not treating women who are adults as if they are young children. I know that decriminalizing may be something that is in the future, far ahead, but we can take steps, for example, recognizing the right to have post abortion care. It's not even a right, but having it almost as a duty for health professionals to provide it, so that women don't have to die or suffer morbidities because they have started an abortion. But then at the same time, also recognizing the role that healthcare providers play in such a scenario and taking away criminal liability from them. So maybe you may punish the person who induced, but why do you have to punish the health worker? I don't know why that is. So again, recognizing that sometimes even as a healthcare worker, your profession may demand that you save a life. That needs to be taken into consideration. But we just need to be a little bit more forthright, even as a country, in terms of recognizing that our indicators on sexual reproductive health and rights are quite poor. They are very poor, with unsafe abortion contributing almost 9% to the maternal deaths that we have in the country, 25% around hemorrhage. And most of the hemorrhage is on people who have had unsafe abortion. So the country needs to recognize that this is a true problem and then take steps to begin addressing it. They can implement some of the models that have been recognized to work worldwide. One of the models is the harm reduction model, which talks about specifically counseling and the provision of post-abortion care, which has greatly reduced the deaths that are attributed towards unsafe abortion in countries like Uruguay, Latin America. They have worked using the harm reduction model, and most of them have restrictive laws around access to safe abortion. So implementing some of those strategies may go a long way in reducing some of the morbidity and the deaths that arise out of unsafe abortions.
All right, I've received some requests from the public, people who want to speak. There was a doctor, but even after I accepted the request, I can't see them here as speakers. Please request again for the microphones. It's probably my phone that is creating that problem. So please request again. I tried to add you as speakers, but failed. And if you cannot, then please write in the comment section to the bottom right. Yes, the bottom right corner. Comment there, and I'll read your comments here and questions to Rose, if any. Now, Rose, are you still there? I can see Rose is listening. Okay. Rose, we had lost you there, but you should be back now, hopefully. I'm getting another request. I think I'm gonna just invite Sehad to co-host with me. Okay, Rose is back. So I just wanted to, as we try to get some other speakers from the public, I wanted to ask: have you tried to do advocacy? Have you tried to speak to the people in power, the people who have the power, the members of parliament, the health committee of parliament, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, and if so, what is there? Because I know that they have technocrats. They have people who do research for them. And even when you present this research, they have the ability, they have the technocrats that can comb through this research of yours, these numbers, and be able to inform their policies that they take. What is their response if you spoken to them about this?
Definitely, discussions have been had. And as I had said earlier, some concessions were made in terms of the provision of post-abortion care, but also in terms of the rolling out of the self-care guidelines, which include, but are not limited to, drugs that can support in post-abortion care and treatment, and also in family planning for women, and self-injectables when it comes to contraceptives for women, which go a long way in reducing the mortality and morbidity. But when it comes to the issue of decriminalizing, that is when issues become a bit iffy for everyone, because definitely our government doesn't want to be seen as supporting what they call a vice, even if you're telling them, but this is something that has existed for as long as women were pregnant. It's not something that just happened recently or was introduced the other day. No, for as long as women have been pregnant, abortions have been happening, whether spontaneous or induced. So the concessions are there, but they are quite limited. And in this way, they have affected the indicators in that we get stuck. We get stuck even in our fight on maternal mortality. Our maternal mortality rate still remains at 16 women dying every single day due to unsafe abortion. 10% of that number, rather, due to maternal related conditions, 10% of that number goes towards unsafe abortions, which is about, give or take, 3 point something women every single day. So we are stuck because our policymakers don't want to make the shift. They don't want to make the shift because they don't want to be seen to be supporting what they call a vice. And now that impasse is what has led us here, in that we are just in the middle and no one knows how we are then going to proceed, either east or west, because now there is only one way that we are supposed to proceed, which is to decriminalize access to safe abortion. But then again, you have to put it in context that we are in a very patriarchal society, and giving women this amount of decision making power over their bodies is something that is foreign to our society. Because I don't know, somehow we think that women are flimsy, they just make flippant decisions, that will just be making now lines at hospitals saying, balujemu, as if there is, they have put no thought into it, as if they haven't arrived at this decision after a lot of thinking. I think we need to reach a point where we trust women. In Uganda right now, like, we have to trust women. The birth rate right now in Uganda is that every single woman of reproductive age is allocated 5.5 children. That is our birth rate. Even for me who doesn't have a child, that is the birth rate we have, which means that women want to give birth to children. And our society needs to recognize that women want to give birth to children. But then the circumstances of the society as is right now make it very difficult for you to give birth to a child and rear them, because of the economic hardships that come into place, because of the nature of the relationships that come into place, because of the situating of a person. So people should stop coming from a point of view that women don't want to give birth. That is false. Many women want to give birth, and we should support them to give birth. But if you haven't put in place protections for women to give birth and rear their children in peace, then I don't see how you can then demand for them to keep a pregnancy up to date. The other time I was talking to someone and telling them that in Japan, they actually pay women to give birth to children. As soon as you declare to the state that I am pregnant, money starts arriving on your bank account. How many women wouldn't give birth in Uganda when something like that is put in place? And even when you give birth to the child, what are the social protections that have been put in place? Can you have access to babysitting services? Can you have access to childcare facilities so that you can go on with your life in terms of your career, in terms of bettering yourself, even beyond your family life? Or are you then tied to this child for the rest of your life until they are able to sustain themselves? So I think we need to dissuade ourselves from this notion that women just flippantly make a decision to have an abortion. They don't. Most, it is a heart-wrenching, a difficult decision, but then they make it because of the situation that they find themselves in. And that pain needs to be recognized. And we must trust women to actually give birth to children, even when we give them that decision to make.
All right, I have a few requests here. I'm going to ask Jeff Otis Nsimbi. Please unmute and give us your question or comment in 1 minute or so. Jeff, are you there? Please unmute. Mr. Jeff Otis. I don't know if you can hear me. Jeff Otis Nsimbi at Otis Jeff. Please unmute and give us your question or comment in a minute. All right, I'm not sure if Jeff can hear me, but I also do not think that he has a good connection. I think his connection is having problems. I see a request here from Tusime Ibu. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Tusime, are you there? All right, as we wait for those, I'm going to read some comments here from the comment section. Mr. Hashtag says advocating against unsafe abortion needs a concerted effort from key players. Do you think there is government goodwill when it comes to putting an end to unsafe abortion, given the fact that the laws and policies are biased or ambiguous? That's the question for you, Rose.
There is no goodwill. That is the truth. We have interacted with members of parliament, we have interacted with different policy makers, professional bodies, but the goodwill doesn't exist. Majorly because of what I told you above, that we don't trust women in this society. We infantilize them, we think they are children whose decisions are not well thought out and whose decisions hold no weight. So that is it. We don't have goodwill. But then Mr. Hashtag is very correct. We do need a concerted effort. It's not only one side that is going to fight for this and win. We need people to come on board and support us so that we can be able to decriminalize it, even at that level, to make sure that those sections that actually infringe and make it difficult for women to access safe abortions are taken out of our penal code. So we do need a concerted effort. We need our policymakers to come on board and actually push for this within their different ministries. We need the health workers to come on board and push for this. When you look at areas like Ethiopia, where they actually decriminalized, it is the health workers who led the fight, and it is the health workers who made people see sense and say, oh, okay, maybe abortion is a medical procedure, it's not something that we should overly interfere with as the state. And they decriminalized it at that point, on particular grounds, but more or less expanding it. When you come to areas like Latin America, it was the women who are leading the fight and the women's movement. But now when you look at our neighbors in Kenya, it is their new constitution which is pushing this inherence in terms of dignity. So there are multiple approaches that can be taken in order to have everyone on board. But it's good if we all speak with one voice and recognize that these laws do not take away abortion per se. They do not. Women continue to have abortions, whether or not we have laws that criminalize abortion. So Guttmacher did a study a few years ago, and they were comparing the incidences of abortion in countries that criminalize abortion and countries that do not criminalize abortion. And they found very few discrepancies. Both countries equally had the same amounts of abortion happening across the world. And the only difference was whether or not the abortions were safe or unsafe. So they found out that in countries where it is criminalized, the abortions were actually unsafe, which meant that most women were dying or were suffering morbidities. And they came up with the statistic that 97% of all unsafe abortions happen in developing countries which have restrictive laws and policies. So the law within itself inherently is not stopping abortions from happening. What it's doing is making them very, very unsafe for women because they are dying and suffering morbidities.
All right. Thank you very much. I think some people are still having connection problems, but I know that there are those who can hear us, as I did with the test earlier on. Razak says he can't hear our voice, but well, at least I'm sure my guest can hear me and I can hear her too. And I also did a test earlier on to prove that everybody can hear. So, Rose, what do you foresee? What do you foresee in the future of this country, Uganda? Because we are living in a globalized world, and it looks like there are people who really understand the issues that you're talking about. You know, the elites are not very far, are not cast far, throughout the country. Right now, at least everybody has studied. Most people, I would say, have studied to a level where they can read a report and internalize it and understand at least the basics of what these reports are saying and the basics of these numbers. So at least we are sure that the 70% who are the youth, the young people of the country, can understand what you are saying. Do you think that it's possible that this critical mass, the 70% of Ugandans, will then push government's hand to work on these issues as we wrap up?
I think the biggest problem that we have had in advocacy around sexual reproductive health and rights, and for different issues, sexuality education, access to contraceptives, abortion, etc., etc., is that people may in principle agree with what you're saying, but at the same time, they still have to live in their societies, and at the same time, they have to report to their churches and their mosques about the activities that they are doing. So whether or not they can come out and explicitly say, yes, we agree or we do not agree, that becomes a bit more problematic because they have very many accountability mechanisms that may not allow for them to say that. For example, you go to Zambia and you find some health workers there who are telling you, I would have loved to help you in terms of getting an abortion, but mama, the hospital I work for cannot allow me because of the values of the hospitals. Again, we have to recognize that 55% of all our health facilities in the country are religious based, and also 75% of all our education facilities, the schools, are religious based. So carrying those values and imposing them within the healthcare system and the education system becomes it becomes almost compulsory because of who owns the schools that we have, who owns the healthcare facilities that we have. So our government has to come out strongly in terms of imposing some of these policies to make sure that they are implemented across the board in spite of who owns what facility, who owns what school. So these are some of the things that need to be critically looked at, even as a country, before we can have even any semblance of an idea. Otherwise, we cede too much power to religious institutions, and then they begin to dictate what can or cannot be done within their different spaces that they hold for Ugandans at large. So we just need to be a little bit more careful in terms of whether or not people can agree openly with what you said. Behind closed doors, they might, but openly, it may be a bit more difficult. But are we getting there? I think we are. We are. The current cultural wars completely show you that these are not issues that are being discussed behind closed doors anymore, but people are openly speaking about them and people are openly advocating for them, which means that there is some semblance that we are moving in the right direction, that we shall not be boxed down. I can appear on this Twitter space and actually advocate for access to safe abortion for all women in Uganda without fear or favor. Maybe something that wouldn't happen 10 years ago. And people are learning slowly but surely. So we hope that things will change. But if they go along the trajectory that we have here, as I told you, it will only disenfranchise people who don't have money, the poor, the vulnerable, the young. Those are the ones who are going to be affected by some of these laws. But people who have money, people who are educated, people who are rich, and that's why they will not come out to speak openly, because for them, they know it's not an issue that affects them. These laws don't affect the rich. They don't affect people who have money. They don't affect people who are empowered or who are educated. No, they affect the poor. They affect the downtrodden. They affect the vulnerable, because then they are the ones who are going to be caught up in the criminal justice system. So again, looking at it from a classist perspective and why people are not coming along with us, it's because they are not affected by the laws anyway.
All right. Thank you very much, Rose, for that very interesting space. Rose has really, really advocated. You know, we're supposed to share experiences about advocacy, but I'm sure that by the end of this space, you have changed some minds, and I know that you have really, really done the actual advocacy on this space. Thank you very much, Rose Wachikona. She's a senior attorney at Women Link Worldwide, and she was speaking to us about her experiences in advocating against unsafe abortions. And we're talking about what worked and what didn't work. Continue with this conversation on the hashtag safe and legal care, and we'll have another space next week to talk about the same issues, talking to somebody else in another sector, but also attached to the issue of unsafe abortions. Remember, as I told you, this is an entire series. We'll continue having these spaces over and over again. So if you have a friend who wants information, this is the place to be. We're going to be giving you information. We're going to be talking to people who know, people who have the right information, so that we can all understand these issues at a higher level. Now we've got to go now, but I'll be looking at the hashtag and replying to some of your comments and questions on there. But also you can follow Sehad. Thank you very much, Sehad, for making this a reality and making sure that we have this conversation as Ugandans on this space. And as I've always said, you never know who is listening. You never know the person who is listening here will start this conversation over a dinner table, at their dinner table tonight, and the person seated at that dinner table could be the Minister of Education and Sports or the Minister of Health. You don't know. And that's the beauty about social media, because it is social. Everybody is here. Thank you very much, Rose Wachikona. Thank you very much, Sehad. Thank you very much, all my listeners. And I'll see you next week on this space. Good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Daniel. Bye bye.